With the letter of introduction safely stowed away in my bundle, Robert and I set off as the only passengers on the first coach of the morning, just as the light rain began to fall, of the sort that is barely visible but coats everything with moisture in minutes. Still drowsy after my wakeful night, I rested for a while on the broad and comfortably warm shoulder of my brother. We briefly tried to discuss the funeral, but as both of us were exhausted with grief, the talk soon fell to the weather, the uneven road, and other aimless things. Subsequently, the hour came for the coach to rest at a pleasant-looking whitewashed country inn, the Jolly Ploughman. Robert swung me to the ground from our seats atop the coach, took my hand in his, then stooping under the low beam of the door frame, pulled me into the inn. It was as pleasant inside as without, furnished with long refectory tables lined with benches, and large armchairs situated in the dim corners, and by the large but low brick fireplace. Bundles of dried hops hung from the beams, and horseshoes and copper or pewter drinking vessels were displayed above the bar. Without hesitation, observing a lanky young man in the shadows, Robert strode to the bar to inquire if luncheon was available. At this hour? Once assured that it was, he began to order himself a gargantuan quantity of food, which when it arrived consisted of a pork and a beef pie, both as big as a baby's head, a dish of boiled potatoes and eggs, bread, cheese and pickles, a jam pudding, and to wash it down, a jug of beer. For myself, a sensible portion of bread and cheese and a jam tart. Once this mountainous order was put before him, and the bearer was greeted with a hearty "Thanks, sonny," followed by a slap on the back that almost overbalanced the slender lad, Robert set about it methodically and with such enthusiasm that an observer who didn't know otherwise would have imagined that he'd been in prison without food for months. He cut the pies into quarters and ate each in great mouthfuls, accompanied at regular intervals by the pickles. Then he worked his way through the potatoes with lashings of butter, and when I thought surely his appetite must be sated, he got his knife and cut two thick hunks of bread from a loaf, which he ate with the blue cheese, pausing only to gulp down some more beer and grin at me, as I watched in some astonishment. The jam pudding was consumed to the last scrape of custard, which he wiped from the edge of the dish with his finger. Then, with closed eyes and a satisfied smile on his handsome face, Robert sank back in his chair, long legs and large feet outstretched, and the buttons of his burgundy waistcoat under considerable strain about his middle from the enormous amount of food he had just consumed. His protruding belly, I observed, now wedged tightly against the table. I thought he would fall asleep in this undignified and somewhat comical position, but instead he suddenly opened his eyes and rose from the seat, pausing only to pull the waistcoat down over the evidence of his vast meal, and hailed the young son of the innkeeper, who was lurking beyond the bar. "Hi, lad, you there," he cried in his booming voice, waving at the poor youth. "I've got a great thirst upon me. Fetch me another jug of ale, will you? There's a grand lad." The nervous youth nodded, brought Robert another jug, then scampered back behind the bar like a startled rabbit escaping from a large bear. My brother tossed a few coins towards the boy, which spun and bounced across the polished floor, then sank back down expansively in his chair, lit his pipe, then began to regale me, and anyone else who happened to be within earshot, with a tale concerning the theft of his coat, his voice becoming louder and the events of the story more embellished with each slug from the overfilled jug. "Well, me little pet," began Robert, folding his hefty forearms across his broad chest and fixing me with his large conker brown eyes. "Usually when I'm the talk of the town, it's for some other reason. Likely due to this," he added guiltily, pointing at his drink. Never would I have reckoned that something so daft as a stolen coat would be the reason. It were all due to my promotion to gaffer of all the rabble of lads known as Boots. I got the idea in me head that I ought to get me send a coat fitting to the job, a new and finer one of those pilot coats as they're known in the trade. A close-fitting coat with a long tail and wooden buttons. I found a likely tailor on Bridge Street who was able to construct such a garment in the crimson cloth. I smiled inwardly at the thought of my gigantic brother in such a coat. He who was so naturally conspicuous. In fact, the tailor said he was delighted to make a coat for such a fine figure of a man, giggled Robert. But alas, this fine garment was not to be worn for long. For unbeknown to the tailor or I, some vagabonds had observed me from the shop window and were intent on robbing me. The devils must have followed me to discover where I work and then devised a scheme to pose as boot boys. But, cried the increasingly flushed and enthused Robert, as the bloody fools have scarce knowledge nor brains in their heads, they made a fatal error. One of them, the ginger fellow, stole me coat from where I left it, swinging from a hook in the back room of the bar, before starting my night shift as assistant barkeep. Then, damn numbskull that he is, he went directly to the pub across the street where the other idiot was waiting for him and attempted to hawk the coat to many of the drinkers. Then in comes the law, 2 men who had just finished their beat and pinches them both. It's my coat, says one. I swear it, sir. 'Tis true, swear on my life, says the other dimwit. Here my brother paused, pouring himself the large dregs from the jug. And then? I asked, much entertained by this performance. Robert shifted in his seat and sat the almost empty beer glass on his stomach. Well, what both the ruddy imbeciles failed to notice is that the 2 of them are barely the high of my shoulder and half as wide. Ha ha ha! He roared, causing a party at a table by the window to turn about to observe the source of the hilarity. Then the next thing I know, I'm having a kip in me bed after a little sup with a few of my pals, when there's a hammering on the door that would wake the dead. So there I am in me nightshirt, faced with 2 lads from the law. What do you know about the young fellows Bartle and Holsworth, says one. Now, says I, except that they have little wit between them. But aren't you the gaffer of the boot boys, said the law. Eh? They say that they're pals of yourn and we're all a set-up to get money off the hotel, says the other. Here, Sally, I almost lost me rag. Pals indeed, like I'd waste my breath on a pair of milksops like them. And why would a man with any sense who has just been promoted take such stupid action, says I. And here comes the best part of the tale. 2 days later, it went to the magistrates' court, where the lads involved, the tailor and I, were all called to give our side of the story of the coat, as well as a few other witnesses from the pub where they tried to hawk it, including... Here Robert paused for dramatic effect. One Louis Knight! I thrilled at the name. Wait until I tell Isabella this, I thought. You know the gentleman, of course, as it turns out. He's a grand lad, and it's thanks to him that this daft business is resolved. Right.